Hello, Strat fans. I'm Jimmy James, and this is Strat-O-logy, the show for and by students of Strat-O-Matic. Today, our guest is Peter Maffei. Evil Empire is his moniker on Strat 365 as a big-time Yanks fan. Peter has been kind enough to come on and talk mystery cards and how to read them. I was lucky enough to have someone help me out on my first ever mystery league. A big shout out to Jimmy C. We have a bunch to get to, so let's get down to business. So sit back, grab your cards and dice, and let's roll. Today on Strat Chat, I am here with Peter Maffei. You might know him as Evil Empire if you play Strat 365. Homage to his favorite Yankees. One of my favorite guys to play Strat 365 with. And when we decided we were going to do the topic on how to read mystery cards, Peter was the perfect guest. I knew Peter was the person that I wanted to have on this show. Thank you so much for being here, Peter.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me. And this is definitely one of my favorite Strat 365 topics. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you have a knack for reading cards, and you are right more often than you are wrong. Definitely. I have watched you read them now for about a year and a half. And a lot of times I think I know what the card is, but you prove right very often. And I just thought that I think that other ways to do that, other than just that injury, is one of the things that is a hindrance, a blockage, a reason not to play the mystery and a reason only to play the yearly sets or to only play the all-time great set is because it's easy to feel like I don't understand what everybody else around me understands. I just thought that this was going to be a great topic. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. So I'm also here to kind of, demystify the mystery as well. And, really when I talk about predicting mystery cards, one of the things I always like to start off with is actually how you select your players. So if you've heard me in some of those Sir Strat, the roundtable, I use the word safe a lot. So I like to play it safe because, it takes some of the mystery out. I look for cards that have 5 seasons that are all very similar. They don't vary too much. So you already know what you're getting into prior. And one of the cards I'll use, or 2 of the cards I like to use as an example. One of them is Donovan Osborne in the 90s set. He's a very low, he's a cheap pitcher, 1.25 million, I believe. He's a solid pitcher, and all of his stats, they don't vary too much. His whip, I think, is in the range of 1.28 to 1.32. So there's really not much variation. So even if he's having an off season, it sort of just takes the mystery out of it. You don't have to worry about him. And you know he's going to have this specific range. And the other one I look at it always, I love the Albert Pujols card in the 2000 set, because a lot of the times in mystery, people will shy away from, spending money on some of these studs because they don't want to get their dud year. Albert Pujols doesn't have a dud year. You're going to spend the money. You know you're going to get a stud at first base. He's going to play really good defensively for you, and you know he's going to hit probably 310 with at least 35 home runs. So the word safe is where I like to start. Now, if you are, if you want to gamble a little bit, let me start also with avoiding cards. So avoid cards that have multiple dud years. I've always found that the luck of getting one of their better cards, it's just not going to pan out most of the times, so 2 out of 5 times and you have a player that's just unplayable. And he's usually a player that you probably just can't play on those 2 seasons. So you have a 40% chance of him just being unplayable, and it's a waste of money. Like I said, the risk is really just not worth the reward, especially if he's one of your starting 9. Now, if you are going to draft studs, high-priced players, they obviously, if they don't have a dud, if they don't have a dud, great. If they have a dud season, don't be scared, because I also like to encourage people to go hard on some of those players, like Greg Maddux, Mickey Mantle in the 60 set, Sammy Sosa in the 90 set, McGwire in the 90 set. Now you're going to invest a lot of money in these players, and they do have a dud season. If it doesn't pan out, you now have $9 million. You have $10 million to build your team back up. You're not really stuck on a salary cap. So, you can turn Mickey Mantle, if he is a dud, you can turn him into two very good players to supplement what you would miss from Mickey Mantle. Greg Maddux, for example, in that 90 set, he has 4 of his Hall of Fame years. And that first year, I believe it's 1989, not that great. And he's definitely not a $9.5 million pitcher. So you turn that around. If he comes in your dud year, you turn that around, you can get a very good pitcher for, $4 million. And then you have some money left over to boost your bullpen or boost your offense. So whenever we talk about predicting mystery cards, I always like to start off with selection of cards. So that's really where we'll start. And then, really now you get into the game. You have your lineup. You have your lineup set up. If you're new to mystery, if you're new to the mystery set, really what the mystery is when you draft a player, you're going to get a possibility of 5 different years. So it could be, and it's completely randomized by Hal. You don't know what it is. So this is one of the things, like you mentioned earlier, this is the thing that scares people away. And hopefully these keys that I'm about to give you will, help you, take that fear away. So first, let's start with the hitter's cards.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So the obvious one is injury reveals. Player gets injured. You take a look. He has a ground ball shortstop. You'd want to look on those cards. You look at the corresponding number to the ground ball out, and then you will know what season it is. Now, sometimes he has multiple ground ball plus injury outs on different years, and we'll get into that once that happens. Obviously, when you are selecting, one of the things that I like to look at, also select players that have different injuries on different years. So one of the things I will determine, really good example I like to use, Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn's card, I believe in the 90 set, he has 3 of his sort of pedestrian years for Tony Gwynn are all hit by pitches, but his 2 seasons of 394 and 370, both of those seasons have unique injuries. So those are ones that are very easy to predict. And you will know very early on what one of his seasons will be. So you really want to look at that. So injury reveal is not just as simple as, okay, got hit by a pitch. What season was it hit by a pitch? When you're selecting your cards, you want to have that uniqueness to the injuries. That helps. Now, that is not obviously it's not a non-starter for me when it comes to selecting cards, but it's something I look at. I call it a cheat code, if you will. If I have a chance to 2 players that I'm not sure I want to draft, a lot of times that unique injury will help me decide who I want to draft. So the other thing I look at for hitters cards is my righty-lefty splits. This is, again, seems pretty obvious. So extreme righty, extreme lefty splits, it really should coincide with the card. Now, for example, there are certain cards like Bake McBride in the 70 set. He is very slanted towards righties on 4 of his cards. One of his cards, I believe it's a 7 slanted 7 against lefty. So I just recently had him in a season. It's actually currently in the season I'm in, one of the seasons I'm in right now. I had him, and he was my platoon player strictly for righties. He wasn't hitting any righties, and he was hitting 400 against lefties. I immediately knew what season he was very early on in this, and then he had an injury reveal as well, and I'd solidified it for him. Another one for hitters. This is a little bit more. This is a little more out there. It's not as reliable, but it's one that I've used, and it can really fine tune it. Is triples. Not a lot of players are hitting triples. So this is a pretty good one for power hitters, for example. There are power hitters. For example, Mark McGwire, on 4 of his 5 cards, has 0 triples. On one of his cards, he has 2 triples, and that is his 54 home run season. And if he hits a triple very early on, you can pretty much narrow it down to what season it is. Because more likely than not, if you also look at the hitter's card, the hitter he was facing, pitchers, I apologize. A lot of pitchers don't necessarily have a lot of triple splits on their cards as well. So a triple is kind of a rare play, and those are a pretty good indicator. There are some extreme examples out there. Shannon Stewart in the 90 set, he has one. If you play him, for 600 bats, he's on pace to hit 65 triples. It's a really good predictor. And then also one of the things you want to look at as well is stat anomalies, home runs, strikeouts. So there are some players that typically don't strike out that much, or strike out quite a bit, who had an anomaly of a year where they didn't strike out that much. There are some cards in the 80s where they're good for 150 strikeouts, and then the next year they only had 70. So if you see a lack of strikeouts or an increase in strikeouts, that is definitely something that you can correspond to a hitter's card as well.
I agree with you completely off of that. In fact, I use that same thing about the triples for figuring out which year I had a Boyer in the mystery set. First, I had an injury reveal, and that narrowed it down to 2 seasons. And then one of those 2 seasons, he just has a large amount of triples against lefties.
Yeah, there you go. That's that stat anomaly that is really a great indicator for me. And it's really the difference. The anomalies are what I look at when I'm not quite sure what I have. And again, I don't want to make it seem as simple, as cut and dry as it is. There's a lot of guesswork involved, but that stat anomaly is really the deciding factor for me a lot of times in whether I'm going to pick up and or drop somebody. A lot of the times when I'm looking on the free agent market for a player that was dropped and just hitting 200 points underneath what they're expected to hit, sometimes you got to look at those stat anomalies. Maybe that person's hitting 250 when he probably should be hitting 310, but he has 4 triples and he just got unlucky. Because again, at the end of the day, we got to remember this is a dice roll, and sometimes the dice just don't go in your favor. So those stat anomalies, specifically those triples, I really like.
We'll be back in 2 shakes.
You're listening to the 365 Sportscast Network, the streaming future of sports talk radio. Listen to us round the clock on the net over 365sportscast.com. On your phone with the 365 Sportscast app, and on your favorite smart speaker by enabling the 365 Sportscast skill and saying, "Play 365 Sports." The views, opinions, and content of the show hosts and their guests appearing are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of 365 Sportscast, LLC, its owners and partners, or this network.
And then that really brings us to the next one. So the pitcher's cards. Number one, really the obvious. If a pitcher's pitching badly, it could just be his bad year. That just is it could be as simple as that. And if you take a look at it, and I do reference the 90 set quite a bit. That's probably the set I'm most familiar with. Greg Maddux is a really good example because he has a couple of really very different seasons. Obviously, his one, and I call them dud years. It's night and day from his Cy Young year. You will know very early on, Greg Maddux shouldn't be getting shelled at any point regardless of where ballpark he's pitching in. So if you find that he has 3 or 4 consecutive starts that he's giving up, 5-6 innings, and he's giving up 5-6 runs, you should know very early on that is not the Hall of Fame Greg Maddux you've selected. And that's pretty simple. Again, key indicator.
I think with that one, it's that you said about checking how their starts went is a very good indicator rather than individual games. Because of dice rolls, you could in one game with Maddux, a guy could roll on his card literally 20 out of 25 times, and that game Maddox is probably going to lose and could get shelled, and it really have nothing to do with his card. So if you kind of look at the cumulative quality starts, kind of, I think, gives you a little bit more of a gauge there on pitchers.
I agree as well, and I'll go into some of the what to do when you want to make a decision, and that's definitely one of the factors I always go into is patience. But another few key indicators for pitchers is strikeouts. There are certain pitchers who just have, obviously they strike out a lot of batters, so their strikeouts don't necessarily vary, but you may find that there are certain pitchers, specifically in the 90s set, that have some strikeout anomalies. They had a year where they struck out 250 batters, and that's just not something that happens very often. In the 2000 set, for example, I think Dan Herron has a year where he struck out 250 batters, and all the other cards I think only had 125 strikeouts. It's a very good indicator. In fact, that's actually not one of his better cards. He just happened to strike out a lot of people while he was giving up a lot of home runs. And obviously hits. Now, hits are sort of a little further down on the list for me, because hits, there's a lot of, as we all know, there's a lot that can go on in Strat that will affect what a hit is. But I tend to, again, this goes back to selecting cards. If I'm looking at cards, pitcher's cards, I look for low whip, and I'll always look for fewer hits than innings pitched. Kind of independent of walks. I don't want a pitcher that walks a lot of people, but if I had a choice, I'd rather just give him first base than have him hit a double. So hits are definitely another key indicator for me for pitching. And that will also show you, again, that can narrow it down. Maybe not specific, but you can get a good, narrowing it down. And then really performance independent of your ballpark. Obviously, pitchers in Coors Field will operate much differently than they will in Petco Park. But you really want to take a look at how they operated in some of these middle of the range parks. So if you have a pitcher who you're not sure of, go back and take a look at his start. One of the fields in the 90 set is Veterans Field. It's 1 through 10 all the way through. If you have somebody in a division who has Veterans Field, I'll go back and see those starts and how he performed in those parks. And that swing in those parks can really determine for me, was it really just because of the ballpark, is because it's a poor card. So I'll try to take some of those extremes out. So again, if a pitcher plays in Petco all the time, goes to Coors Field, he's going to behave differently. But if you can get some of those nuances while he's independent of those extreme parks, that also help you figure out your pitchers as well.
Yeah. And definitely finding out pitching, I think, is definitely tougher than finding out hitting.
Oh, absolutely. So I have played over, I believe I've played over, 200 mystery seasons. And there are still times where I'll drop a pitcher, and at the end of the season, Greg Maddux is a good example. I dropped Greg Maddux, and it was his best year. I just got unlucky for the 10 starts, and I was positive it was his dud of the year. So it's still difficult. These things will narrow it down, but pitchers are quite difficult. And just for injuries for pitchers will only get injured, I believe, on the when they are pitching to the DH. So there's the pitcher injury reveal, in my opinion, doesn't reveal much, but you can sort of narrow it down by who they're pitching to, when they're pitching to certain people. But the injury reveal for pitchers is a little more difficult than it is for hitters.
Yeah, and if you're not in a DH league, there is no injury reveal for pitchers.
Exactly. Okay, so now we've decided, I kind of went through selecting cards. I've went through how I determine hitters and pitchers. Okay, not so fast is really what I wanted to tell everybody. What could fool you into thinking a card is bad? The rolls. At the end of again, this is a dice game. So if you look at Strat 365 on every league, you can cycle through the tabs, and one of them is miscellaneous, and one of them will show the dice rolls. There are times where a pitcher is performing very poorly. You'll take a look, and he'll have 75% of the rolls on the hitter's card. There's just nothing you can do about that. My advice is patience. Just wait. And vice versa with a hitter. You may find that Albert Pujols in the 2000 set is only hitting 220. Well, why? Well, he played his 20% of his games in pitchers' ballparks, and he has 70% of the rolls on the pitcher's card. You have to be able to see that. That's the number one indicator for me. The next one, ballpark. Like I said before, Greg Maddux, he's not going to be himself in Coors Field, and Barry Bonds is not going to be himself in Petco. You want to take a look again in that tab. You can find the splits for the ballpark effects. So you may be in a ballpark where he had 17 chances to hit a single, and only 2 of them ended up being a single. And for home runs, you may be in Coors Field, and he has 15 chances to hit home runs, and 14 of them ended up going out of the park. So he may not necessarily be, a power hitter, but he's just getting lucky in his Coors Field. Pitching. Number one thing with pitching, I will always look, especially in my advice to people when they're dropping their pitchers, when they're not performing well, is fix your defense first. Poor defense will kill good pitching every single time. So if you have a pitcher that will throw a lot of ground balls, doesn't have a lot of strikeouts, but has a really low whip, and he's just not performing, take a look at your middle infield. Are you putting out a 3? Are you putting out a 4 at second base? Is your shortstop a 1 or a 2? How's your center fielder doing? Because the majority of fielding action will happen with those 3. So my suggestion is and I know hopefully Sir Tony is listening to this, defense, right? He's a big proponent of defense first. Good defense will fix some bad pitching, and bad defense will kill that expensive pitching that you've spent so much money on. So always look at your defense.
I had a season that started out for a hitter's wise with Jason Varitek where I was 1 for 15 on singles on ballpark chances, and I was 0 for 7 on homers. And I was actually in a hitting park, and I was just having terrible luck, and there was really no way to tell which card it was because those had been so skewed, those numbers, that it really didn't give me any opportunity to tell.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people shy away from mystery leagues for is, when you draft a player, you expect Mickey Mantle to hit 55 home runs. It's a very uncomfortable feeling drafting a player like that, investing $11 million in somebody like that, and him not performing. And then you can't really quantify it without having to do some of these analytics. So it makes people, and that's the reason why I love mystery sets, and I play predominantly mystery sets, because I love that. I'm such a nerd, and I love looking at those stats. But I think that's one of the things that hopefully we're helping some people here today kind of demystify that, and it makes it a little more playable for some people, a little less scary, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why that people avoid it, is because when you first start playing, it seems like everybody knows the extra set of rules that you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's mostly what the type of stuff that we're talking about here today.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so now you do all of this, you listen to these tips, you look at your cards, and you've got an injury reveal, and you have a dud of a season. Okay, so what do you do? All right, my number one thing is this. I always tell everybody, patience. Know what kind of league you're in. Most leagues that I play in are, they have a drop penalty, 95%, 90%, 80%. Know what that date is where 95% turns into 90%. Give yourself some time. If you have an automatic injury reveal and you know that it's a dud of a card, you need to be able to have an exit strategy. But you won't always, and you won't always have an exit strategy, and I'll go over that. But if you're pretty sure you have a bad card, know your drop. Give it that time to that period, before it goes from 95 to 90%, and to really make sure you have all of your stats in order and you're sure.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
Do you do it by game 41, or are you really looking at the number of at bats?
I look at it by game 41, because that's really where the penalty that's where by losing 10% of a salary is really going to hurt you, and you're not going to be able to make up that quality. 100 at bats is usually a key for me. I really won't make any adjustments. I won't make any drastic changes without a guaranteed injury reveal prior to 100 at bats. But usually that game 41 is where I will start to make those moves. But yeah. So like I said, map out your plan. If you're going to make a drop, make sure you're getting a better player that benefits your team. So I said earlier, if you know you're going to draft Mark McGwire, for example, and you end up getting his dud season, map out what you're going to do with that $9 million, right? So you may, obviously when you draft, not everybody gets what they want. So you may have had a hole at third base. You may have had a hole at, in pitcher. Maybe you really wanted a middle relief pitcher, but you couldn't spend the money because you went for Mark McGwire. I always make sure, don't wing it. Take a look at who's on the free agent market. Map out how much money you're going to get back. Know exactly what your cash flow is going to be when you drop that player, specifically Mark McGwire, and then have a list of who you're going to pick up and monitor those players, because there are a lot of players who just like to play the drop ad game, and make sure those players are available. If you're in a league that has a lot of action, people like to drop and add players like it's fantasy football, you may want to make that move a little earlier. You may want to take a little bit of a gamble to fix your team, and using some of those metrics we talked about earlier. But again, you want to make sure it benefits your team. And here's a really good example. Sometimes a bad card is playable. And my favorite example of this is Tony Phillips in the 90s set. Tony Phillips has some amazing cards where he has a 420 on base percentage. This guy's an on base machine. He's a decent second baseman. His defense is a 3, but it's still playable. He can play in the outfield and not really hurt you that much. But he's an on base machine. But he has a couple of seasons where he's just a dud, like we were talking about. But he still gets on base. He's a 350 on base percentage against left. So maybe dropping Tony Phillips, maybe there's nobody out there that's going to replace Tony Phillips, but you can put him as your in your 2-hole or your 8-hole against lefties. He's still playable. So just because you've got an injury reveal doesn't mean it's an automatic drop. I've won championships with picking up duds to fill specific holes for me. And then don't feel like you need to replace a pitcher for a pitcher or a first baseman for a first baseman. Maybe if Mark McGwire's hurt, maybe you have Ron Coomer on the bench. Maybe Ron Coomer can fill in for you. And you have Greg Maddux. Maybe, like I talked about, maybe Donovan Osborne is better. Fill other holes. It's Strat-O-Matic is very fluid. When you're drafting, everybody's going to draft Greg Maddux, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, all the top players. You're not going to replace Greg Maddux if he's a dud. But what you can do is, I like to use the term, I'm going to Billy Bean it. You're going to recreate Greg Maddux in the aggregate, right? So you're going to get a $2 million pitcher that's going to, go against a team with heavy lefties. You're going to get a $1.5 million pitcher that's going to, pitch against heavy righty teams. And then you're going to get a $6 million second baseman and really fortify your offense. Or maybe you got to fortify your defense. Maybe Greg Maddux is not going to be good on your team because your middle infield is just terrible. And maybe you just need to go out there and replace your shortstop with somebody and pay some more money and get a really good shortstop for that month. So there's a lot of options. Now, predicting mystery cards is definitely not it's not an exact science. But one of the things I really want to impart on everybody today is if you have a bad card, there's a way out of that. And I think, again, that is how a lot of people are scared. Oh, I spent all this money and now it's wasted. I can't use George Brett. Well, you know what? You can't use George Brett, but the fun of baseball and the fun of Strat-O-Matic, in my opinion, is how do I recreate that George Brett card? How do I recreate him with all of the people left on the scrap? And if you do some of these analytics and you really analyze it, you can be just as successful as you thought that team was going to be. And I'm sure you as well, Jimmy, I'm sure you have a team you look at and it's like, this is a championship caliber team. And they finish, they start 10 games under 500. You get an injury reveal, you pick up this pitcher, you pick up that, and suddenly this team now wins, 25 out of 30 games, and you're back on track. And I think sometimes that is the fun of Strat, and that's why. So that's really why I want to demystify mystery cards today.
Definitely, I think we're doing a very good job towards that. Also, one thing I've realized is that, especially after you get past that 5%, when you're looking at dropping that player at a 10 or a 20% drop, at that point, that 20% drop, you may not find anybody else that is as good as the player you have on their dud year. And you might then just be taking yourself even farther down that hole. That $10 million guy that, yes, it's on a bad year, that $8 million guy back, there is nothing for $8 million that will be even close to his bad year. And I really think, that's where that, knowing that 5, 10, 20%, I think that's really where that comes in, is knowing what you'll be able to get back for that value still out there.
Yeah. And one of the things that people undervalue is the fact that in the mystery set, when you get a reveal, there is a known quantity out there, which even if it's a bad season, that's an advantage. If you know exactly what that player is going to do, you can plug them into a role. And that's just one position you don't necessarily have to pay attention to. You don't want to keep somebody in there if they're going to be a detriment to your team. But, in the league that you and I are currently in together, 24-man team, 24 team league, there's not a lot of flexibility. So once you get that injury reveal, you're going to have to make a hard decision. Do I figure out how to use this player effectively in my lineup, or do I make a move? And I have found, especially right now, we're currently in a 70s mystery league with 24 teams. I had a couple of injury reveals. I just couldn't do anything about it. So I had to really set my lineups and set my strategy around that poor performance. And I've been able to get some good performances because I've put them in the situations that will allow them to succeed. And I've mitigated any sort of opportunity for them to not succeed by just not putting them in those, an example I have, I do have Bake McBride. I just don't hit him against righties. He's a lefty hitter, but I just don't hit him against righties, and he succeeded for me. If I had just thrown him to the scrap heap, there is not a lot on that in that free agent pool that's going to be any better than that card. And I'll take the 50-50 chance that it's on the pitcher's card and a pitcher's going to strike out, a lefty pitcher's going to strike out a lefty hitter. But because there's nothing, the alternative is no better. So I think that's one of the things that's the most important when it comes to reading a mystery card, is understanding what to do when you figure out what that card is.
Yeah, I came across that in the mystery finals. I had an injury reveal with Callison, and I definitely knew exactly what year it was. And it's his 260, 10 home run year. And I looked at, in that 60 set, there's just not a lot of big hitters, and especially a lot of guys that have on base combined with power, So what I looked on the pile, and there was a guy who actually had an injury reveal, and because of that had been dropped. It was not one of his two best seasons. It was Tony Conigliario, and it's not the 70 and it's not the 65. So it's not the 36 or the 32 home run year. But it's going to be the 24, 28, or 20 home run year where he's 290, 270, 255. Well, in all those cases, yes, it was not that superstar year, and so that person dropped it because it wasn't. But in my case, I could take that card, get an extra $1 million back, and I knew that his batting average was going to be as good as Callison's any year, and his home runs, his power was going to be double. So somebody else's injury reveal gave me something that I knew that I was able to deal with if I was able to get another $1 million free. And I knew I was not going to have, not quite the defense of Callison, but literally there's even in the minimum, it was going to be double the home runs.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a league that really is lacking power, his injury reveal really helped me.
Yeah, and again, I think it takes time. You're not gonna. One of the things somebody asked me recently, who is a very staunch all-time greats player. How do I really want to get into mystery? I told this guy, I said, what you do is you go draft a team of a mystery team, and go draft a whole bunch of guys who have the exact opposite of what I told you to draft, some really swing seasons, and just draft a whole bunch of those guys, because you're bound to get some duds. You're bound to get some good ones, and it's going to give you a really good array in your lineup. And it's going to give you a full season to let you play around and figure out how to figure those guys out. So there's a lot of things. It just takes time and time and time. You'll know, the more you play mystery, the better off you are. But I just, the strategy of what to do when your player is a bad year is really probably the most crucial of it all. So yeah, I agree with you on that one too.
Yeah. One of the things that when you were talking about the solid reads versus the possible reads, definitely we've got injury that hits that first. But one of the areas that I think is often missed is injury duration. First, if he's injured, now that could take away some seasons too, especially in the 1960s. We'll be back after this.
You're listening to the 365 Sportscast Network, the streaming future of sports talk radio. Listen to us round the clock on the net over 365sportscast.com. On your phone with the 365 Sportscast app, and on your favorite smart speaker by enabling the 365 Sportscast skill and saying, "Play 365 Sports." The views, opinions, and content of the show hosts and their guests appearing are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of 365 Sportscast LLC, its owners and partners, or this network.
And another way for a person that would be new starting out is I would recommend they would start out with the 60s or the 70s set rather than a later one, because there definitely is the more chances for injury reveals on some of the earlier ones. On a lot of the later sets, lots of the injuries are on hit by pitch. Once you get to the 90s and the 2000s, you see that hit by pitch, you just dread it because you're like, oh my God, here comes the injury. But in those earlier sets, there's a lot more of a range of possibilities, injury on a fly out, injury on a foul out, still a lot of hit by pitch, but there's a lot more variation on those injury cards that makes it for the reveal.
Right. Again, that goes to the uniqueness of the injuries is sort of one of the things I will look at. And there's another thing that I wanted to bring up that I personally don't recommend this, but I know people who swear by this method, that Hal knows what players what. That if you were to just let Hal make the decision, if you weren't even to put a lineup out there, just let's see what Hal puts out there, and they know who's the better player. I do not like the computer determining how my team will play. I am very rigid when it comes to setting strategy, setting lineups. I don't like to leave any guesswork, but there are people who very much advocate for the fact that Hal will know who's who. And if you just let the first, 2 or 3 series of the year, just let Hal pick your lineup, he's going to tell you who's what, and he's going to tell you who are the good cards and who are the bad cards. Again, I don't advocate that strategy, but I've heard some people advocate that, and they swear by it. So I wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, I'd heard that before too. And, I'd heard that at one point they would even do it towards they wouldn't set a lineup so that the computer would set the lineup for them also. And I don't see that you're getting, I mean, maybe you would be getting some information, but I don't see how much you would be getting from that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Besides the fact that when it comes to Strat-O-Matic, I'm a control freak, and I want everybody to do exactly what I say. There is no stealing without the sign on my team.
All right. So, let's analyze a card or two. Let's go back on that Boyer card. So I had a hit by pitch, and it was versus Horlin. Horlin is a righty. So it's a hit by pitch versus righty.
Which card are you talking about right now?
Ken Boyer's 1960s card.
Okay, cool. I'm going to pull it up. All right.
So on a hit by pitch,
okay.
And then the pitcher that he went against was a righty. And here's one of the interesting things. Boyer was only injured for the rest of the game. So when you look on the injury list, it doesn't come up. Only injuries that last more than one game. So if you're going to look at somebody off the pile, it behooves you to look at all the games they played in, because there may be an injury reveal that is not being shown. So there's a little point there. So from the hit by pitch, as we go through, it can be the 60 because hit by pitch and injury. Can't be the 62.
True. Can definitely be the 63. Yep.
It cannot be the 64 because he doesn't even get injured in 64.
Yep.
And then because of the injury reveal, it cannot be the 66. So then if I'm looking at then his stats, you see right there, those 3 triples. And then I take a look. So I've decided it's either 1960.
Yep.
Or it's 1963.
Right. So if I'm looking at this, right, so obviously, you're looking at the triples. You've narrowed it down to the 2 seasons. So obviously, you're now looking at the triples. And how many games exactly are we in this season so far?
We are at 48 games played.
And 10 triples is quite a bit of triples in 51 games. So now the next thing really, if you take a look, the benefit of these 2 cards is there's a noticeable difference between the 63 and 60 based on his balance against lefty or right. So that would be, probably be the next thing I would look at. So, how is he hitting against righties and how is he hitting against lefties?
So lefty, he's hitting 352 with 7 home runs in only 71 at bats. And righty, he's hitting 250 with 4 home runs in 112 at bats.
Right. So that's, you're starting to narrow that down. So you're really starting to narrow it down. And this is where you're starting to get your educated guesses there. Again, it's not an exact science, but then if you really want to know for sure, then what I would start doing is looking at individual at bats, individual games. What stadiums did he play at? Did he have a stretch where, his roles were on the, the opposite card? So right now, I think you're pretty lucky.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's that year. It's the 60 year.
Absolutely.
And one of the things, and here's just a little tip on a tool to read that very easily. I do love, and not everybody uses them, but I do love those graphs that they have underneath the cards, especially for things like doubles and triples, that the percentages are a little bit harder to read on the card. That graph really breaks out it's singles and homers are easier to see on the card. Where it breaks down the doubles and the triples, and you take a look at his card between the 63 and the 60, the difference in triples between those cards is radical, and it's versus lefties. So for me, it was not only the numbers and the splits, because especially at the beginning of the season, they were a little closer together. But when he started hitting all those triples and I could narrow it down to 2, that was that point. Now, that was where I saw that one. Now, another one that I actually had a discussion with someone and I wanted to get your thought on was home runs with a W. So I have on my team also have Billy Richardson, and there is only 1 year on one hand that he has N power. Every's W all the rest of the time. And there's only one card where he could hit home runs on his card, left-handed against that 1 year. Literally, there's no home runs other than that. Well, he had a home run chance and did not make the home run. The question is, and I'm not sure of this, would that mean that would have to be that year that he had that N power? Could that also be the year that he had W power, and because it was a W, he just didn't get it?
A lot of times what I'll look at, I don't necessarily think that's a really good predictor, because there's so many variables for that. It could have just been a lucky roll and it hit a home run without a split for them. It could be he just got lucky in a ballpark. And a lot of the times I find that when we're looking at the W and N power, it sort of skews your view of things, and it takes you away from some of the more key indicators. Now, I agree, it is one of the indicators you can look at, but I don't necessarily think a one-off home run for a guy like Bobby Richardson is going to be sort of determine exactly what year it is. That's just sort of my view.
And I'm not sure, because he was 0 for 1 on the home run chance. So that was the question. Would it show up as a home run chance if he had a W power, or would it really have come up as a single chance? So there was that question on that. And I went back and looked at Ozzie Smith card, and I had the 87 year. And he ended up being 0 for 5 on that. And so then that kind of makes me feel a little bit more like, knowing that was at 87 and it is a W power, and there is no home runs on his card, it kind of must mean that it does not read that as a single check. It still reads it as a home run check when it's recording that in there.
Yes.
So I think that, like you said, I looked at it originally as, oh my gosh, this has got to be that year. But now that after I look back at that Ozzie Smith card, I truly do not believe that that is that indicator. And doing that N and W is a little more nuanced than it seems to be, I think.
Yeah, I think the N and W would be something that would be like your fourth indicator. That would be sort of like you've narrowed it down, and you really want to make sure you're going to drop or add a player at the right time, or you're just not sure for trade purposes. That's just really below it. There's so many other things that can happen prior to you getting to that N or W that it's in my opinion, it's just not a very good way of determining the outcome.
Another one, kind of like the triples that I was thinking of, and I had actually pulled this from a thread from the forums, was, and I had not thought of it before, was the hit by pitch. Hit by pitch can only happen on the hitter's card. It can't happen on the pitcher's card.
Correct.
So that is kind of like triples. It's not a perfect indicator. Mm-hmm. But it also it can be more like the 0 injury year. It can be a excluder, if that makes sense.
I agree. Yeah,
I see that as, you're like, okay, well, he got hit by a pitch. There's no hit by pitch on his card that year, so now we've narrowed that card can go away.
Right. Yeah.
So that was one other ones that I had thought of. Were there other indicators that you usually use?
No, I mean, basically, I've kind of gone over most of the indicators. I really try to keep it as well. I mean, when I say simple, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, but I try to keep it in that box. Once I start varying from that box, and for me, I find that I'm making bad decisions. These are the ones that are sort of the tried and true, indicators. And if you take a look at other 365 mystery players, these are a lot of these seem to fit all of those boxes. Some of those other nuanced ones, like the letting Hal draft your thing or the Enter W, those are really those quote unquote deep dives. But I try to stick into that. Like, again, I stay within this box, and I hold myself to those, because those are the ones that you're going to make the educated guesses on. And sometimes once you start taking one of these indicators away, you're just not making sound decisions. You're taking that dice roll and trying to predict a dice roll then. And that's just bad. That's just bad math, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that advice that you went back off of patience and
Yes.
understanding that statistical anomalies happen regularly.
Yeah.
That type of thing. I once dropped a guy because he hit a triple. Because I was like, oh, the only year he can hit a triple is his bad year. Well,
Yep. Yeah.
that was a bad drop because it was his best year, and it must have been a triple that he hit a double, and it stretched it, or on the pitcher's card maybe. And I mean, which is very rare, but I mean, still can happen. And even though he couldn't run, maybe it was a really bad outfielder out there with a bad arm, and that's the reason why he ended up getting that triple. And, it's hard to tell that in a mystery league. That dice roll is not going to be really exactly laid out there for you to see the reason he hit that triple. So you're like, okay, well, this guy can never hit triples except for his terrible year, and you drop him because he got a good hit, and then it comes back and burns you. So another thing to remember is there are things like that, stretching a double into a triple, things like that you also have to kind of take into consideration if you're looking at it on that stat.
Absolutely. Again, you want to obviously you know what your strategy is. Again, stretching that out, and again, these are our best guesses. At the end of the day, I could speak for everybody who's ever played mystery. You're gonna use all of these indicators. Every indicator is gonna point towards this bad season, and then at the end of the season, you're gonna realize, oh, it's his Hall of Fame year. How did I miss that? I mean, I've had Tony Gwynn's 394 year, and he's batted 310. And I just, I put it along, but then I got into the playoffs, and he's that 394 hitter, and he surprises everyone, or vice versa. You ride a guy into the playoffs because he just got lucky, and suddenly he's your middle relief pitcher, and he gets shelled, and you find out that you're up to the dice gods at the end of the day. So these are just really our best guesses.
For me, also the guys and ballparks. We've talked about this player in our Sir Strat before, but the 70s and 80s Dusty Baker card. There's, we've talked about the injury that you can tell because 4 years he's injured on a hit by pitch. 1 year he's injured on a strikeout on both cards. That strikeout year is the terrible year. You can find he's injured on a 4 on that strikeout year. All the others are 1. So he almost never, if he's injured a lot and it's a strikeout, there's a card to dump immediately. But there's another side of that people I think don't see is you can see him and him be terrible. And somebody say, well, it's got to be that year. And then you go look and they're in the Astrodome. And Dusty Baker's card, all of his home runs come on ballpark checks. And you're playing him in the Astrodome, he's going to be a 200 hitter. It is going to be terrible. But if you have him in Fulton County Stadium, he could be an all-star. You can take a look back and somebody have dumped that guy thinking it's a poor year, but really they're playing him in a poor place.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give everybody an example, and I mean, it's not mystery, but I am currently also playing an all-time great season. I have the $17 million Babe Ruth card, and I'm playing in Mile High Stadium, and he's hit 280. And he's just gotten some bad dice rolls, and it's just what it is. So, I mean, I know again, it's not mystery, but you just patience. This is, if everybody listening out there today if I can impart anything when it comes to reading your mystery cards, is patience, patience, patience. The numbers, baseball will end up predicting what happens. Just like everybody else, a 300 hitter will be a 300 hitter eventually, but just know how to find that 300 hitter.
Yeah, very cool. I think that's a great way to end our
I agree
today, man.
was
Thank
great.
you so much for being here, Peter. I think we were able to give a lot of information today and demystify these mystery sets. Thank you very much for being here, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful show this is. And I appreciate being a small part of it today. So thank you so much.
Oh,
really
you're a big part of it. Thank you for being that and being on our round tables regularly. I think we've got a great group of guys that come from lots of different backgrounds and different takes on it. So it's a great thing to have that group that we can break things down and get more than one person's opinion on. So thank you for that as well.
Thanks again.
Okay, we'll be right back. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. The link to the forum thread that we talked about earlier, I'll post it to Facebook. It is an excellent resource. A huge thank you to Peter, just so much good information. A thank you to our regular cast of characters, Andrew Burkham, Joaquin Lewis III, Carolyn Snyder, Jimmy Dees, and the music man Jeff Teczon. All the music you heard today was written and produced by Jeff. If you like the show and want to help us out, share it with a friend. Follow us on social media, check out the website, or if you have any tips on reading cards, give us a call. Our number is 855-888-0096. Hey Jeff, will you play us out?
You got it, Jimmy James.
Find us every Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on 365 Sportscast radio streaming service. Download the app. Makes it crazy easy to listen. See you next week. Same Strat time, same Strat channel.
Jimmy James.
You're listening to the 365 Sportscast Network, the streaming future of sports talk radio. Listen to us round the clock on the net over 365sportscast.com. On your phone with the 365 Sportscast app, and on your favorite smart speaker by enabling the 365 Sportscast skill and saying, "Play 365 Sports." The views, opinions, and content of the show hosts and their guests appearing are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of 365 Sportscast LLC, its owners and partners, or this network.